Okay. So the sorry, it cut off. The so part two here, continuing on with the evolution of media. So the new media, right, as it says on slide 10, right, reinvented themselves with really the internet revolution, and it's just hard to explain to you folks, especially if you're those of you who are under 25 have just grown up with the internet your entire life. How much it's revolutionized the way that we consume information, the way that we receive information, and all those kinds of things. I don't even know that I can adequately express exactly how it's done it. Citizen journalists are sort of non-professionals. I would say here's the dirty little secret too. As a lawyer, I'm a member of an actual profession. And if you're a journalism major, this is not a slight against you at all. Members of the media are not professionals in the sense of a professional is one who has an esoteric, specialized body of knowledge, doctor, theologian, lawyer, accountant, certified public accountant, CPA in particular, medical doctor, physician. There's very few professions like that. Profession doesn't mean gets paid. It means usually you have a master's degree or higher, or some graduate further education, so like a law degree. There's also some barrier to get in that you have to overcome. So for me, it would be the LSAT to get into grad school and the bar exam to become a licensed professional attorney. And then with that, there's an enforceable code of ethics. So journalists are not professionals like that. Literally anyone can be a professional. A journalist rather. Not everyone can be a lawyer because you got to go to law school and do all that. Not everyone can be a certified public accountant because you got to go to school and get the CPA and do the years and all of that. A nurse isn't a profession because a nurse doesn't have to get a master's degree, right? It's not. It's an undergraduate degree, and really, quite frankly, it's a 2-year course of study. So nurses are awesome. Love nurses. Not a profession. Not like doctors. Not like lawyers. Not like theologians, etc. So anyway, journalists are not professionals like that. So technically all journalists are citizen journalists. So when they say non-professional, I would say non-credentialed. Again, if you want to be in the media, grab your phone and go hustle. Just go hustle. Like go out there and, if you're in Los Angeles, find a news story and just start reporting on it, right? You have no less or more right than anyone for the LA Times or CBS or Fox News or CNN to do. You may not have the access, right? You call the publicist of, I don't know, Chris Pratt or the president for that matter and say, hey, I'd like to sit down and talk to you. They might say, well, how big is your readership? You might say, well, 5 people. And they say, well, we don't really have time for that. Sorry. Thank you, but no. But they might say yes. And if they say yes, kudos to you, right? You have no further. They'll issue you a pass. You show up to the White House. You show your ID. You get in. You sit down. You have your interview. And there you go, right? So everyone is a citizen journalist in terms of that. I will say also the difference between you guys now in college and when I was in college is the expansion of choices. I mean, literally we had all cities had major newspapers, of course, but in terms of TV news, we had Fox. Actually, we didn't even have Fox at that time. There was no Fox network, until The Simpsons started in the late 80s, early 90s. So maybe we did have Fox as a network. CBS, NBC, ABC, there we go. CNN had started in the 80s. There was no Fox News, there was no MSNBC, there was no internet to speak of until the mid to late 90s. So we only had 4 or 5 choices for TV news. PBS had some news items, of course, and that's it. And now there are literally thousands, if not hundreds, of news sources, which makes it difficult to discern which is the right one and which is the wrong one, or where am I getting the truth as such as it is from the media. Telephones kind of come back. Our telephones aren't really telephones like in the old days. We don't talk on them like we used to, of course. And then the other one here, this slide 12, talks about niche journalism. So remember earlier I talked about mass market, mass media. Now we have niche media, and niche just means you cover certain things. Now, there are some exceptions. I mentioned Joe Rogan earlier as a podcast. He seems to talk about a lot of different things, so niche there. Yeah. But if you don't listen to podcasts, you're not going to be affected by Joe Rogan, so he's niche. If you all know and have heard surely of like old TV shows like I Love Lucy and all of that. MASH was a show on in the 70s when I was a kid. When Lucy Ricardo, the character, had her baby on TV, and not actually, of course, but the episode where the baby is born, this 1952 or 53, early 50s, early 1950s. And so the country population, say maybe 250, give or take. It's not anywhere near what it is now. 75 million, with an M, 75 million people watched that episode. So about 1 in every 3.5 households or persons in the United States had the Now, there's no recordings, so that means live on whatever night of the week that show aired at, let's say, 8 p.m., people watched that show together, right? Sociologists sometimes call that monoculture. Everyone, regardless of demographic, white people, black people, Hispanic people, rich people, poor people, married, single, religious, atheist, etc., are watching I Love Lucy, right? And then talking about it the next day. In today's world, pick the biggest show that you can find. Let's say, I don't know what the biggest show. Let's just say, I don't watch this show because it looks like trash to me, but Euphoria on HBO Max, or The Pit. My wife and I like this medical show called The Pit. Those are huge shows in modern era. Maybe 6 or 7 million people watch that show at any given time. And they're not watching it at the same time, right? They're watching it here or there. Some are watching it live. Some are watching it on Monday. Or some are streaming it and waiting till the end and binging the whole thing. So that's niche, right? Niche media. Even the big news outlets like CNN and Fox have maybe 2 or 3 million viewers at any one time. So not a huge viewing audience like in the old days. And then questions of bias. So again, they talk about some of the examples. I mean, NBC News got sued years ago for basically doing a story about where GM pickups would explode. And they did a video of how they were testing these GM pickups. And it turns out that the NBC news producer had put tiny explosive charges in so that they would make sure and explode. So they got sued by GM, as you might imagine. There was a case back in the 20-teens, where this kid was shown by CNN and reported by Washington Post to basically be in the face of this American Indian activist at Washington, D.C. Someone came up with a wide shot that showed that the old man came up to the kid and was bothering him. So CNN and Washington Post, who had painted this kid as some sort of smart alecky racist who's bothering this Indian gentleman, turns out the Indian gentleman was the activist and had bothered him. And so CNN and Washington Post basically ended up paying for this kid to go to college because they got sued for libel and slander and defamation, basically, right? So that's there's a decided, but I don't think it's new. Like I said in the other video, all media is biased from the get-go. That's my default assumption. And that isn't a bad thing because everybody's biased. And then you just sort of spot the bias and then account for it. Take it with the appropriate grains of salt, as we say. That's my personal opinion to you, my professional opinion to you as well, when it comes to consuming media. But American trust in media, I would say, is at an all-time low, just as it has been for politicians in the last 40 or 50 years. What I don't know, and I'm not sure anyone really knows for sure, is how new this is relative to, is it worse than it's ever been before? I mean, there's examples of the American media actually basically starting the Spanish-American War in 1898 by reporting on this explosion of a battleship in Cuba which probably was a mistake, meaning a boiler exploded, so a mechanical failure, as opposed to spies and et cetera, but the media drummed up the report, right? The journalism during the Civil War and leading up into the Civil War was horrible. Obviously, the journalism both against and for the Klan and the civil rights, or the Jim Crow era, horribly biased, especially if you're pro-Klan. That's evil. And everybody's biased, right? So I don't know. That's what I'm not sure if it's worse than. I'm always a little suspicious of people say it's never been worse than this, because I'm not sure we actually know how to know that. And then media ownership and content. So in terms of regulation, this is something I deal with a lot more when I teach Bill of Rights and First Amendment. The two basic things are, one is what's called broadcast. So if you think about the airwaves, so if you think about an old radio or a terrestrial radio, there's only so much air bandwidth that you can have where humans can hear it. So if you're on the AM dial and you look at your car radio next time, it's 540, I think 530 AM, and then 1700 AM. So frequency, so how the sound goes out. That's the dial that you can have over the air at which can be received and we can hear it. And then there's some higher levels that I think are saved for like national security stuff. And then FM dial, frequency modulation on your radio, is 87.9 FM to 107.9 FM. So that's a limited resource. So the government owns the airwaves, which means the people own the airwaves. So because it's limited, then you can't just set up a radio broadcaster anywhere, because it would be total chaos and stations would drown out stations and all those kinds of things. So those are regulated. So what do? You get a permit, and then if you're, like here in Los Angeles or area, California, you get Channel 2, is it KCBS? So Channel 2 broadcasts over the air a certain way, and then it reaches, I'm not sure what the max is. You can reach it here in Riverside. I don't know if it goes all the way out to Palm Springs or up to Santa Barbara or whatever, but they've got a certain limited, right? And then in San Diego, there's a CBS station. Up in San Francisco, there's a CBS station. Out in Palm Springs, I think there's a CBS station. And they can only broadcast so far because the airwaves will be kind of broadcast out. Same with radio stations. I remember, I don't know if it's still there, there used to be a 96.7 in the Inland Empire, which is San Bernardino, Riverside, for those of you who are not from here. It would play classic rock. And then when you get into Los Angeles, there was a 96.7 FM that played like Hispanic music, Tejano music. And you could literally drive down the 10 freeway, or I-10 for those of you back east, and when you hit LA County, the rock would fade out and the Hispanic music would come in, right? So you're coming in, here's Soundgarden, Los Cojolitos, and just like that. And it just, why? Because they had a license to broadcast a certain power out way. So now, that's called broadcast. Now, if you get into like satellite radio, so like Sirius XM radio, those literally pump straight to your car from a satellite up in the sky. So those are unlimited to some degree. There's no content regulation there. So if you listen to certain songs, and you might hear blips because they're bleeping out the F words and the N words and all the things that are in some of music, that's because over the broadcast area there's some content regulation, not viewpoint regulation, but content, like specific types of words. On Sirius XM, if you listen to some of those talk shows and stuff, there's no editing at all. It's just boom, whatever's out there, right? So if you listen to Joe Rogan podcast on Apple Podcasts, which of course goes to your phone and is an app, so streaming through satellite, through cable, those are more open in terms of all of that, just in terms of content. And then politics, the First Amendment protects also mostly from viewpoint discrimination. So they can't censor for content like that. They can censor for obscenity, so naked people, sexual content, exceedingly violent content, time of day. So sometimes in the daylight hours things are a little calmer, And then the evening hours, they're a little more, loosey-goosey when it comes to that. And so, they have the War of the Worlds example here on the latter half of the thing. Anyway, that stuff's all well and good, but the digital streaming versus broadcast, and then same with papers, right? You can write whatever you want when it comes to a newspaper. You own the paper, you own the ink, or in today's world, the digitize, the photographs, and all that kind of stuff. They can control maybe where it's sold. In terms of like if it's harmful to kids. So again, usually things of a sexual nature, but things of a political nature, you're gonna have a really hard time limiting access to those things. You still have to pay your permits and your fees and all the things that everybody has to pay for when it comes to that. So anyway, that's just a broad overview of a very fascinating topic. I guess I would just say the other thing when it comes to consuming media, I always think about 1 John 4, and I can't remember the verse now off the top of my head, but it basically just tells you to test the spirits, right? And so if a preacher is telling you something, don't take his word for it. Go to the Bible, check it out, right? Check it out. See if what he's saying matches up with the Bible. News media, hey, if I got to check my pastor, I'm checking that guy at Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or New York Times or whatever. So check it up against the truth, right? Someone says something about politics, ask a professor who knows about politics. Ask someone who works in city government who you know. Ask a cop who is a cop, or ask a defense attorney who knows about criminal defense, or a doctor who may know about vaccines or cancer surgeries or any of those kinds of things. So as always, as much as you can, vet your information against people who you actually know and know to be experts, right? So a lot of the mistakes I think come from people just kind of empty open their head and whatever comes in. They fill their head with all sorts of stuff and don't really take the time to vet or, test the spirits, as the Apostle John told us in his letter. Thank you.